Herzlich willkommen zu einer weiteren Folge Wissenschaftler reagieren, heute mit dem Film Stowaway. Achtung, das ist der zweite Teil. Der erste Teil ist bei mir auf dem Kanal Dr. Whatson, den könnt ihr euch angucken, wenn ihr oben auf die Infokarte klickt. Ansonsten, ich werde jetzt gleich wieder auf Englisch weiterreden, denn meine beiden Wissenschaftler hier sprechen Englisch. Ansonsten nochmal Spoilergefahr, wir werden jetzt bald über das Ende des Films sprechen, also schaut euch den Film auf jeden Fall vorher an, bevor ihr mit diesem Video hier weitermacht.
We breathe like 8 liters of air every minute, so throughout the day it makes a lot. 20% of that is oxygen.
The design of the ship is not only realistic and could be feasible, the design of the ship also heavily played into the plot line.
This is the thing we provided.
This is the one
exactly.
You grew that?
Yes.
That scene is definitely science fiction that's rooted in science fact.
Okay guys, thanks again for being here and let's just continue. So they talk about the Stowaway helping them with their science stuff, and she says you're gonna have to share credit on whatever you publish. Is that something scientists worry about, to have to put credit on their papers? Is it better to do everything on your own and be the only name on there?
This is a very interesting subject, and it's very funny that this sentence appears in the movie because it's totally academic. So someone had to tell the screenwriter, just put this one in. So in academia there is a saying, publish or perish. So everyone's main job is to do research, of course, but at the end it needs to be concluded by a publication. Authorship on a publication is something a lot of people care a lot. So in this case, if the Stowaway helps the David character to do some work, then he should be acknowledged as a co-author. A lot of people don't like to do this because they think it takes away some credit from them. And this poses a lot of problems because nowadays science is very rarely individual task. It's team play all the time. Certain experiments, research is so demanding that not a single person is not capable of doing it. And it's so interdisciplinary that you need to consult other people. So most of the time publications contain multiple names. So it's weird that someone would be concerned by an additional person added to the list.
I think it also depends on the field. For instance, different fields have different standards. So I think it's common, for instance, with biology that you would have just a few people that are on your paper as co-authors, and those are people who contributed significantly to the research that was in the paper. However, in my field, in astrophysics, it's common to have so many people on your papers. And I think that's just because we're a really collaborative field, and we have to remember that astrophysicists are often working with, telescopes got launched into space, and these are very complicated instruments, and you might find one specialist who is really focused on one aspect of the work, so they do a very small part, but then it's an important part, and then somebody else also can help you out with a different important part. And it's easy to just talk to a lot of people, get a lot of great ideas, and try to get them into your paper as a thank you.
Okay, moving on. We have a problem with the machine that scrubs CO2 from the air, which is what humans breathe out, and we want to scrub that because we need to breathe oxygen. And I wanted to know, is this how the ISS works? How do astronauts breathe in space?
Yeah, exactly. So indeed, there is an oxygen supply, but you also have to get rid of the CO2 because you can get carbon dioxide poisoning. Too much carbon dioxide can kill you just as much as not enough oxygen can.
Yeah.
The ISS also has a CDRA, actually...
Probably multiple.
I was about to say, exactly. They have a very special... It's basically like a synthetic rock that has a very tiny yet porous material. So there's itty bitty tiny holes in there, and they're actually small enough that they can filter out CO2, which is one carbon atom and 2 oxygen atoms, from O2, which is 2 oxygen atoms. You want the O2, you don't want the CO2. So basically what they do is they just put a filter made of all these tiny rocks that can actually capture the carbon dioxide in the rock and allow the oxygen to pass through, and they just filter it through the air system.
It's amazing, and it's actually a technology that we are researching right now to filter CO2 out of the atmosphere to hopefully mitigate a bit of climate change.
Exactly. So we could imagine that if we could scale this up to industrial size scales, then we could attach this to factories and really help to mitigate some of the issues we have with global warming.
Amazing. The commander is asking the botanist, the scientist, if he can produce oxygen with the microgreens that he's growing. So the leaves that he was measuring, and he says it's only producing 90 liters of oxygen per day, which I thought sounded like a lot, but he, for the viewer, said that's a negligible amount, which was probably good. And then she was asking about the algae. He was that's part of his science as well, and he wants to use that as a starter culture on Mars. So first of all, what's that all about? What's the science here?
Yes, so because of the scrubber failure, crew is facing two problems. One, that they cannot recycle CO2 that they breathe out, and second, that there will be not enough oxygen for them to breathe in. Both plants and algae can deal with this because they use CO2 from the atmosphere and water to generate sugars that they use to grow and produce oxygen as a byproduct, in fact. But this oxygen is emitted to the atmosphere and we can breathe it. What they say here is that the microgreens produce 90 liters of oxygen, which for you seemed a lot, but it's really not so much. We breathe like 8 liters of air every minute, so throughout the day it makes a lot. 20% of that is oxygen.
So you could tell me if the 950 liters per day figure is accurate?
I think it's even a little bit exaggerated. So in perfect conditions, I think the 600 to 650 liters of oxygen could be enough for a person that doesn't work out, because of course any amount of work we need to do will double, triple and quadruple the amount of oxygen we need. But it's in a good range, I think.
Okay.
It's pretty nice. The other thing is, if this kind of setup he will assemble would be enough to produce this immediately. I think it's those conditions are not optimal, as he even said himself, and I think the production would be way lower than that, but should be enough.
Okay, I think it was really scientifically accurate, as he said. The conditions aren't right, and I didn't want to do this. It will take some time, and was like very how scientists would react to someone saying, "Please use it to grow to make oxygen right now."
Yes, exactly. I think this was the most accurate part of it was the way he was speaking, because this is super scientific. You're always pessimistic. So if someone asks you about something, first you mention the problems. I mean, he says, "Oh, I cannot do it. Everything is there, but maybe I can think about something." This is super scientific. In fact, algae are used to produce oxygen to clean the atmosphere from CO2, because they are way efficient than plants for that. Because every plant needs to grow roots, it needs to grow the stem, which is basically wasted. It doesn't do photosynthesis. Only the green parts of every plant photosynthesize and produce oxygen with that. Algae, on the other hand, are just tiny organisms, which are usually completely green. And they use all the energy to divide. So basically to produce another algae that can do photosynthesis, which is very efficient. And in producing very high quantities, they can for sure deal with one extra person on the ship. For the process to be very efficient, you need to grow them in the perfect conditions. So with perfect light, very good import of CO2 into the culture, very good mixing of the culture, so the CO2 can be absorbed by every single cell, and then outtake of the produced gases.
He said that he wanted to use it as a starter culture on Mars, but then he has to use it for this, but then he says he can use half of that. How does that work? So why can't he just like cut it in half more times?
This is not completely clear to me, because in normal case, what we have is stock cultures. So very tiny amounts of algae that are either frozen or kept in cold, where they don't grow. They just preserve there for further use. But from that, you can just take it, or one aliquot of this culture, and normally people have hundreds, thousands.
Yeah.
And he probably has also a lot of it because he wants to test all different conditions. So from that you can just take it a little bit and grow it in liquid, and then take it a little bit, freeze it again, and basically you don't lose anything. Yeah. If you keep feeding them, they will divide and divide and divide. You'll never run out of them. However, problem he may face is that they need this oxygen immediately. And algae need some time to grow, especially to produce oxygen and use the CO2 a human can produce. You need quite a lot, And maybe because of that, he wants to sacrifice some of his stock he has to have a very huge quantities immediately.
Yeah, but he could like use 90% of it and keep 10%.
Yes, and of course, during the growth of this huge amount, he can just sample a little bit, freeze it back, and he's not gonna sacrifice his culture at the end.
So those are the algae rags.
Yes, so he, of course, probably calculated how much he needs, and as you can see, it's a lot of volume.
Yeah.
Because to produce this amount of oxygen and scrap this amount of CO2, you need quite a lot, especially if it's not very efficient. And I think he had 200 or 400 liters of culture, which should be enough to provide oxygen for one person. They're all connected to probably a pump that pumps the air to the culture. Each container is an individual one, therefore he can also use it as an inoculation for another one. So it's a quite safe and well-made homemade reactor, I would say. And here's of course lights around. You see now that they are white, not pink like before, because it looked horrible. This algae at high concentration look like brown, gray thingy.
So basically like the dead algae later.
Even worse, it's very like some kind of slime. And the director of photography really disliked it. Therefore, they went to white light, which is of course also good enough.
But would it be more helpful for the algae to have pink light?
It would be for sure way more efficient.
Okay, and the film was already established that David has pink light, so that makes no sense that David would choose white light if he had pink light available.
Yes, it's definitely a visual choice.
Yeah. Okay. Is this real algae or is it just green food color?
So we provided the crew with real algae, so they would look exactly like that. Problem with this is it takes a little bit of time to grow them in these quantities and maintain them in the same shape throughout the shoot, because this takes I think it was 1 month they were shooting this part. And algae of course grow in this time. They divide, they die. A lot of things can happen during this time, especially in very bright light for the shoot, because of course they have additional ones for the cameras. I'm pretty sure here they are exchanged for colorant.
Okay.
Which is also fine, because it looks very real to me. Okay.
But that's a nice fun fact to have, that it looks real to you, so you could mistake it for real algae.
Yeah, from this distance, of course.
Okay.
So another Hollywood trick shown in the scene we've seen is the time takes for the algae to populate the whole rack. In normal life, they don't grow so fast. You need a couple of days to let them grow to very low concentration, and then another days and maybe sometimes weeks to be dense enough to be sufficient for production of oxygen for a grown man. So again, here it was accelerated pretty much.
Okay.
Yes, so this is the moment where David uses the actual algae for sure. This is the thing we provided.
This is the one
exactly.
You grew that?
Yes, we grew them in the lab exactly in the same conditions. I even have one. There's a tinier plate. Those are the same algae they're using in the film, and in the laboratory, it's not convenient to. No worries, they are completely safe. You can eat them.
Okay. How do they taste?
Like grass. Yes. So in the laboratory, we are not growing liquid cultures all the time, because it's a waste of material. This little plate contains also a huge amount of algae, and you can store it for a longer time. And it doesn't take a lot of space. So basically everyone, not only algae, all the microorganisms are stored on little agar plates. So this is basically jelly, which has the same liquid used for the big culture David has there, just jellified with agar. And then you scrape a little bit of algae, and then they can grow there for a couple of months even. And then whenever you need them, as David here needs them, you take a little bit, put them in the liquid, they dissolve, and starts the liquid culture. The
agar you talked about, but is this different from the medium we were talking about, right?
Yes, the agar is just agent to make the media solid, so it's not consumed by the algae.
Okay, so it's just a store.
Just a store. Yes.
Because instead it would grow if we put it in medium.
Yes, they will of course grow on this agar as well. They will try to colonize the whole surface of it, but they never digest it.
Okay.
It's a very, very convenient way of storing microorganisms. So in this scene, David decides to use the additional rack he has to grow more algae.
It's really painful
because
to see.
It was not enough. And I don't understand his action here because he could keep the plants somewhere else.
And they still produce 90 liters per day, right?
90 liters per day for free.
So he just needs the rag.
Yes.
That's it. So he could just pull the plants out, but he kills it.
Yes. So this would, and of course, additional thing is it would never happen like this. This is biological material. You want to avoid contamination of other biological material, your workplace. So probably he wouldn't cut any of it. He would just wrap all the plants with the soil, with the buckets they were growing in, with a special plastic bag, and then you dispose of the bag.
Yeah.
So for sure he wouldn't be cutting the plants like that.
Okay.
Unless he wants to eat them. But.
Maybe when one rack dies, all the canisters, all the tanks in this rack die at the same time. They're connected, right?
They shouldn't be. They could be connected only by the tube that provides gas inside, which always is filtered. I think it's not visible. There's only a very brief moment where you can see there are little filters on each tube that prevents any contamination. So the only way everything would die would need to come from the initial inoculation, because he mixed this little volume, and then from this with the syringe he inoculated everything. So if there was something bad, it had to be in there. If I were David, I would have everything separated and inoculated from different stocks to be sure. And even if everything dies, he has this entire rack, 200 liters of culture, ready to be used as inoculation, so it's not a problem.
Okay, so once again, Hollywood.
Yes, but this was just for an effect that the measures they're taking are not enough, and I can understand that.
How would algae dying actually look like? Because the canisters go from green to brown?
Yes, in a matter of one day, which is very unlikely. Normally what they do is they bleach, so the pigments inside lose color. So they become paler and paler, sometimes a little bit yellowish, and then completely white. They sediment on the bottom, and that's it.
He puts down his sun visor and then he looks at the sun, but he blocks it with his hand, and then we can see the solar radiation coming out at the side, which I found really, really interesting because you wouldn't really look directly into the sun because it's so bright, right?
Exactly. This is very dangerous. You should absolutely not do this on Earth, much less in space.
Even, you have nothing in between that.
Yeah, exactly. Not even with the sun visor. The fact that there's any light coming in at all through his visor makes this very dangerous.
Oh, okay. So he should not be doing it at all.
He should not be doing this. This is a Hollywood trick. But what it does remind me of is solar eclipses. So essentially what he's trying to do here is mimic what happens when the moon passes in front of the sun. So that blocks enough of the light, 99.8% of the light from the sun, and then you're able to see the very faint edge of the ring called the corona, and that's what the material that's sort of streaming off here is. So the sun always has a corona where there's always material that's coming off and very gently flowing out, and it makes up our solar wind.
Cool. That's very cool. And it might also explain in the very end scene, she becomes trapped in a solar storm, spoiler, and we see probably northern lights.
Yes.
It wouldn't really look like that, but I think that's where they get the inspiration from, right?
Yes, so that scene is definitely science fiction that's rooted in science fact. They only happen and have the beautiful lights because of the interaction of the material from the sun interacting with the atmosphere. You need to have atoms or molecules that make up the atmosphere in high enough densities so that it can absorb that energy from the incoming material, and then eventually it will expel the energy and create the beautiful light. In the end here, what we have is all of the material would still actually be coming from the sun and going past Zoe, and of course it could be actually quite harmful to her. There's a lot of high energy there, both in terms of the particles that could be passing through her body. This would be similar to accidents that happen with nuclear reactors around the world. but there's also high energy light that's going through. Yeah. So of course we know because we can get sunburns that certain types of light can be damaging for us.
What I think one of the consultants of the movie said is that some of the kingfisher generates an electromagnetic field, and this is somehow interacting with the solar wind. Could that be because I also on the Earth it also has something to do with the magnetosphere, right?
Yes. So in that case, it still wouldn't be able to make the beautiful light show, unfortunately. But that would be an idea that would actually that's related to what we call the magnetic sphere on Earth, as you said. And the magnetic sphere on Earth is actually protecting us. It's giving us like a protective force field that's deflecting a lot of these harmful ionized particles. Those are the ones that can actually damage your cells and even your DNA, just like radiation poisoning, and cause harm or perhaps death, as we see in the film. The idea would be to generate a false magnetic field to create a perhaps baby magnetosphere around the kingfisher, because unfortunately, I think the time frame of the movie is about 10 days. It takes about 3 days for humans to get from the Earth to the moon. So the fact that the film takes place over the course of around 10 days tells us that they're already far beyond the moon. So they would no longer be protected by the Earth's magnetosphere. So you want to make a synthetic one by generating a magnetic field that would help with some of this, although it would unfortunately be nowhere near as strong as the Earth's magnetosphere. So I think that's still why it would be accurate that Zoe would definitely be in danger.
Okay, so does it really happen that fast if I get radiation poisoning? If I stand in a solar storm and nothing's in between me and the sun, would I die in a matter of minutes?
That is another science fiction that's actually just for Hollywood, although there is a little bit of truth in the scene. So in a spacesuit, you don't have a lot of protection. You know, you have to be able to move in the spacesuit to be able to do these sort of spacewalks. And we actually see that they're quite maneuverable here, which is also a little bit not true. I was recently watching a spacewalk, and they're very stiff. But because you need that flexibility, I mean, you can't have lots of metal plating. So yes, you would be getting sicker faster if you were in a spacesuit and outside of the vehicle. And even for the ISS, in case of massive solar storms, there's a special room that's actually extra shielded. So if there's a solar storm, everybody rushes to that room, and then that's how they can be protected. Because not only do you have the regular hull of the spaceship that's made of metals, then you have this extra thick metals. And I think in the film, this is the fun fact, it actually took place, the shielding room looked like it was happening in the set piece that we have here.
So this is the shielding room?
This is the shielding room.
Oh, that's good, we're safe.
Yes, what they did is they closed down the shutters that we have in the back here, and then everybody was gathered there, and I think that's when all the lights were turned down low, and they were worried and trying to figure out that last mission that they had.
Yeah, exactly. How often do solar storms occur? Is this like a very, very big coincidence, or could this like regularly happen?
That's an excellent question. So how often solar storms occur depends on how the sun is behaving. And believe it or not, the sun has what we might consider mood swings. So there's an 11-year cycle that the sun goes through. For 5 or 6 years, the sun will be very quiet, and it won't actually give off as many solar storms. So you might get some sort of ejection of mass, not on this scale. This was very energetic. It was like a big one. But every 4 or 5 days, when it's in its quiet period, it will give off something a little bit, which is why the ISS has to have this shielded room, because these are frequent events. But as I said, not always in the severity. You can think of that, the one that they had in the movie was more of an explosion, lots of energy. Sometimes it's just like a gentle little breeze, like no big deal, just gently coming off the sun. On the other hand, if we're in the solar maximum, that's when the sun is very angry and energetic, and it has more energetic coronal mass ejections, and they happen more frequently. You could have them up to 2 to 3 times per day.
Okay, so let's wrap this up. Directed by Joey Penna, Mystery Guitar Man, actually, the YouTuber. How did you like the movie?
I liked it, in fact. I think the scientific code, the whole space travel, was just a setting for the moral dilemma the crew had to face, which I really like. I like the way it was shot. with very modest way, not a lot of special effects and so on. It reminds me of old sci-fi movies, and this is nice.
Okay. How did you like the movie?
I really enjoyed it. I'm a big sci-fi fan, and one of my favorite parts of sci-fi is the ships and how we're traveling and how that contributes to the story. And sometimes the ships are just set somewhere so you can have some sort of laser battle in space. But here, I really love that the design of the ship is not only realistic and could be feasible, but the design of the ship also heavily played into the plot line.
Yeah.
So it was almost like the ship was an extra character, and I really enjoyed that part.
Nice. I also liked it very much. I had some scenes where I maybe would have done it a little bit differently for the science of it, but in general, I really liked the film.
Yeah, sometimes we have to bend the science just a little bit so we can get that Hollywood drama.
Yeah, and to get a better story, sure. Guys, thank you very much for being here with me and telling me everything about this movie and the science behind it. I enjoyed it very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Und an euch, vielen Dank fürs Zuschauen. Schreibt mir gerne mal in die Kommentare, was ihr von Stowaway haltet. Was hättet ihr anders gemacht? Was fandet ihr super? Was fandet ihr nicht so gut? Ich bin gespannt, mit euch unten in den Kommentaren zu diskutieren. Und falls ihr den zweiten Teil hier jetzt zuerst gesehen habt und den ersten Teil noch nicht gesehen habt, dann könnt ihr einfach hier klicken und euch das Ganze noch anschauen. Wie immer, vielen Dank fürs Zuschauen und bis zum nächsten Mal. Bleibt neugierig. Euer Cedric.